Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
Today's guest is Amy LaBelle. Amy is not just a lawyer, but also the founder and winemaker at LaBelle Winery, a thriving winery destination in New Hampshire, and a bold example of what happens when you follow your passion into the next chapter. Amy began her career as a corporate attorney in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, eventually moving in-house for more than a decade at Fidelity Investments as assistant general counsel. But during a visit to a small winery, she felt a spark. So much so that she started making wine in her Boston apartment. What began then as a side pursuit evolved into a full-fledged business, LaBelle Winery in Amherst and Derry, New Hampshire, which now boasts multiple locations, a restaurant, a market, an events venue where weddings are done, and a growing lifestyle brand. As Amy puts it, her formula for success is love of learning, dedication, integrity, love of craft, innovation, and passion. In an industry where women are still underrepresented, Amy stands out, not only as a winemaker and an entrepreneur, but also as a role model who has turned a daring idea into a thriving enterprise built on community, creativity, and craft. Today, she's not just a winemaker and a reformed lawyer, but also a writer, a speaker, and an inspiration. In our conversation today, we'll trace Amy's journey from the dawn of her legal career through her transition into winemaking and entrepreneurship, and into the dusk of legacy, reinvention, and impact. We'll discuss risk, transformation, purpose, and how the skills of one profession can drive success in another. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's dive right into it and get right to what our viewers and listeners want to know. A little bit about Amy and her arc of professional life. So what in the beginning made you decide to become a lawyer, and how did that process unfold?
So I am a small town girl from Chicopee, Mass. One of the first child in my entire family to go to graduate school of any kind. So that was pretty exciting for my family. And I chose to study law after an accident that kind of took away the ability for me to pursue a dance career I was a dance major in college originally, and I had an injury that was kind of career ending in the dance world. And so I started studying with all that extra time and energy I had, and I found that I really loved to book learn. I really just hadn't focused on it a lot because I'd been dancing so much. And so the spark came and I said, I think that I could pursue this further. And I really wanted a professional career. I really wanted to work as a business lawyer. I knew that immediately that I didn't want to be a litigator, for example. I wanted to be on the transactional side of things. And so I thought, what a great way to pursue a really interesting career to help businesses grow and to work in that field. So I applied myself and I got into Temple University, and the rest is history, as they say.
What was Philadelphia like? Going from a little town in Massachusetts to Philadelphia had to be a rude awakening.
Oh gosh, that's a great question because yeah, it really was. Yeah, I went to Philadelphia with kind of wide eyes and thinking, trying to figure out how not to get murdered on the subway. There was a lot to learn there for sure. But it was a great experience and a real growing one. Of course, you remember going to law school, that first semester is so scrambling for your brain. I literally felt like my brain was being rewired through the law school process. I don't know if you had that same experience, but it's so intense that first semester. They're kind of breaking you in, and breaking you in many ways into thinking like a lawyer. And so experiencing all that at the same time, I was experiencing this complete cultural shift from small town Chicopee, Mass to Philadelphia was definitely something I'll never forget.
It's funny you talk about the rewiring. I think that's one of the most difficult hurdles for young law students to absorb when they go to law school. They think it's going to be like college was, where it's rote learning and not getting down to the core issues of logical reasoning. And I
Right.
remember I had a professor who was teaching bankruptcy, and there was a case, I forget what I was briefing, I don't remember, but he stood over me. He was over 6 feet tall, and I was seated, and he stood over me and just grilled me for a half an hour straight about the case, trying to drive me into thinking logically as opposed to just feeding it back. And I look back at that moment as a pivotal moment in my own legal career where I really got the message that, okay, this is what lawyers have to do. So you're right. I mean, the rewiring is something very real. And I
Yeah,
always tell kids when they're going to go off to law school to get ready. That first semester is going to be a totally new experience for you.
absolutely. Shapes everything.
Yeah, it does. It does. So you left law school and you went back to New Hampshire.
I left law school and I received a job offer in New Hampshire. I mean, I had been living in Western Mass. The offer I got in New Hampshire was the offer closest to kind of my home base of my family.
Mhm.
And so I took the offer in New Hampshire. And, my family used to spend a lot of time in New Hampshire in the summers and hiking and whatnot. New Hampshire having so much to offer, with coastline and mountains. And we really have it all up here, except for great winters. Because I guess if you're a skier, it's a great winter, and I do ski, but as I was saying, it's very cold here in the winter, so you've got to get used to that. But other than that, New Hampshire has everything. And so I was excited to accept an offer at the largest law firm in New Hampshire, which wasn't that big by big city standards, but we had 55 lawyers and I got my name on the letterhead and I thought that was just great. So I was here for about a year and then I actually took a different job in Boston. I was offered a job at the oldest law firm in Boston, Hutchins Wheeler and Ditmar, and I couldn't pass it up to go into their mergers and acquisitions department. So I moved to Boston, another big city, and fell in absolute love with Boston. I just still to this day love the city of Boston. And I practiced there for about 7 or 8 years. And then ended up moving back to New Hampshire ultimately when I went in-house to Fidelity Investments.
Oh, they were, but so you were in their offices in New Hampshire, not the offices they had in Boston.
I was in Boston for a long time, but I found that I was supporting the business unit that was in the Merrimack, New Hampshire office a
Oh,
lot. So ultimately, I said, you know what? I really wanted a garden. And I'd been living in downtown Boston for a long time in a brownstone, and that was a great place to live. But I said, I think it's time for me to, I don't know, get a house and a garden and try that for a while. So I decided to stop commuting up to the Merrimack, New Hampshire office and move up here. And I got myself a house and a giant garden that was way too big. That's a story for another day.
well, that's good. That's good. That's good. So in the early stages of your legal career, I mean, yeah, the women tended to face a glass ceiling, had to deal with that kind of thing. They still do today.
Yeah.
Take us back in your experience in that male-dominated profession of law. How did you deal with that in your early stages?
It's interesting. The acceleration of women or the acceptance of women in the legal field was really happening right while I was practicing. So I kind of was part of the evolution that's still admittedly evolving today. We're not quite there, right? But in the beginning, I remember I'd go in and, I'm kind of, I'm a very young at spirit person anyway. And so when I was actually young, which I'm not anymore, I looked really young. And so as a young lawyer, I often would get the question at deal tables like, oh, could you get me the coffee, hun? Or are you here to take notes? And nobody had any concept because I was the only woman in a 23 lawyer tax department, at one point. And so there were comments, there were things, but I never ever let that phase me. I always just thought if I do great work, my work's going to speak for itself and I'll earn everybody's trust and I'll just keep putting in the hard work. And so I just was used to working really, really hard to make sure that I could prove myself in that way so that there'd never be a doubt that I could get the work done and, that I was as good as everybody else in the department. So I just kind of, I never used that card. I never felt like I had to. I just kind of forged ahead. And I'm still doing that because in the wine world, it's the
Mhm.
same way. Only 4% of the world's wineries are owned by women, and only 2% of those are women founders. The other 2% being wineries that are handed down through family generations. So I'm still in the same boat, but it's okay. I just continue to turn in good work.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the key in the end of the day. I mean, I had one guest on the podcast earlier, Kathy Green, who's a lawyer in New Hampshire. And Kathy graduated in the late 70s from law school in New Hampshire, and she became the very first criminal defense attorney in the state. I mean, that was back in the late 70s. So the evolution of women getting involved, particularly in New England, in some of the legal profession is not that long a period of time that this revolution
Exactly.
has occurred, and
I
it's got a long way to go, but it's getting there at least, which is good to hear your story about how you dealt with that. Now,
It does,
somewhere,
but I feel like it was just like I was a part of that. I could kind of see it
yeah.
evolving. I practiced with Nancy Sizemore, who was probably friends with Kathy Green. She was one of the first of three, I think, women lawyers that really were practicing in the state of New Hampshire. I don't know if you knew Nancy, but she was phenomenal.
No, I did not know her, but I'll definitely ask Kathy about that.
Great.
Um, so, so at some point, yeah, I got to hear this part of the story. At some point, you're in a Boston apartment, toiling away in corporate law, and you got the wine bug. Tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was in my fifth year practicing law. It was the summer of 2001. And I had just started, I just went in-house to Fidelity Investments. So I had gone from the private practice in New Hampshire to private practice in Boston, and then got invited in-house to the Fidelity Investments legal team. And so I'd only been there a month or two, but I had a pre-scheduled vacation and I went up to Nova Scotia, Canada, not wine country. And I walked into a small, teeny tiny winery there just on happenstance. Like I drove by, I took my car on the ferry from Portland, Maine, right? So I got in my car at the disembarkment and rode up the East Coast toward Halifax, the East Coast of Nova Scotia, if you can picture that map, part of the map. And on the way, I went by this little sign on the side of the road that said, winery. It was a hand painted sign, like something somebody made in their workshop or something. And it said, winery with a big arrow pointing down this dirt road. And I had time. And so I said, well, I'm going to go do that. So I took a right, went down the dirt road. I walked into this little teeny tiny winery, and they were making blueberry wine that day. Maybe three or four people were working there. They all were happy. It smelled amazing. I got to taste the wine, and something about all of that sensory input produced in me this epiphany moment. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, I think I missed my calling. I think I'm supposed to be a winemaker. And this is not a rational thought at this moment. Okay. I had still $103,000 in student loan debt from law school. I had just taken this incredible job at Fidelity. I was their youngest senior legal counsel ever. And so it wasn't exactly the time to jump ship and, start a career in winemaking. P.S. I don't know how to make wine at this point. They don't teach you chemistry in law school, right? So, but what I'll say about that moment, and this is the important part, I think, for any of your listeners, and that is that I'm so grateful that I didn't ignore that moment. Because I think it would have been very easy, especially as a woman, to kind of push that down and say, oh, stop it. You're being so silly. You worked so hard to get your law degree. Look where you've just got this amazing job. Like stop being silly and flighty and, focus, as my teenage boys say, lock in, um, focus on the job and stop dreaming about crazy things. But I didn't do that. That feeling that I had that day in that winery looking around was so strong and I couldn't ignore it. So I spent the rest of the vacation completely obsessed with the idea. Luckily, I was a business lawyer, so, doodling out, business plans on the back of napkins and kind of thinking that through was a second nature to me. And so I barely remember anything else about the trip other than thinking through this. How could I open a winery? How could I learn how to make wine? And I immediately saw the vision for LaBelle Winery, which was a community gathering place, a place where people would celebrate all manner of things, where they could learn about wine and great food and great cultural, issues, where we would have lyceums and talks and author, it's just like I could see the whole thing abuzz with activity all the time because I didn't think a winery by itself could survive in New Hampshire. And I think my instincts on that are I still stand by those. I think it had to be more, it had to be everything. And so that was kind of the immediate vision. And I'm so grateful that I followed my heart toward that path.
So you went home and in your apartment in Boston, you started making wine.
I sure did. From that, mo I like to say from that day in Nova Scotia, Canada, standing in that winery, to the day I opened the doors at LaBelle Winery Amherst, it took me 4,083 days to do that. And that's like 12 and a quarter years. And I counted those days because every single day I did something to move the dream forward. So that very first day I got home from that vacation, I walked over to the bookstore. I got the two books they had on winemaking, home winemaking at that point. And on the way home, I stopped at Whole Foods, got some blueberries because that's what the winery in Nova Scotia was making, blueberry wine. And I certainly didn't have access to wine grapes. So I said, well, I'm going to get these books and I'm going to make some blueberry wine in my apartment and see how it goes. And mind you, I lived on like the fourth floor of a brownstone walk up. So I had supplies shipped to the house and, I had to like lug like, big heavy supplies up to my apartment. This was a hard fought hobby, but it was well worth it in the end. So I had a 608 square foot apartment. It was a floor through, so front to back in a brownstone, and it filled with the aromas of winemaking, and like winemaking smells amazing, right? So all my neighbors started saying, "What are you doing up there?" 'Cause kind of wafting down the staircases, and I told them, and everybody was very excited to be my guinea pigs.
Oh, wow. But okay, that 12-year period, you must have had to battle through a lot of obstacles and setbacks. And how did you keep your focus during that time? And
Oh God.
also practice and have an active practice of law.
Yeah, so I practiced for 16 total years. Like, I did not quit my day job. I did all of this on nights and weekends because I still had the aforementioned student loans to pay and, a mortgage. And I wasn't married and didn't have kids. So at least I was, free as a bird to kind of pursue stuff. And I didn't have other obligations until I met my poor husband, Caesar. And so, I told him my plan. In fairness, and he married me anyway. So we got married in 2004. No, that's not right. We met in 2004. We got married in '06. And so he came into the picture, and then we did have two babies right away. So pretty quickly, I did have two kids under the age of 3 and my full-time day job. Caesar also had his full-time day job. And so there were many obstacles. So I mean, going back to the beginning, I didn't know how to make wine, so that was a major obstacle, right? Um, so first, I enrolled at the University of Davis University of California at Davis. They have an amazing wine program, and it's a distance learning program. So I didn't have to go in person to everything. So I could go. It was just the beginning of online classes, and so I could matriculate with students on campus as an online student. It was amazing. So I was able to take classes from real winemakers in California who are doing this, not only at their own wineries, but at the UC Davis, wine program, because they have a winery inside UC Davis. And so that was amazing. I would only fly out for like lab classes and chemistry stuff. So I had to do that in person, which was phenomenal. Tried doing those classes, 7 months pregnant. That was an obstacle, and I couldn't taste any wine either, but oh well. That's the price you pay. So, that was an obstacle which I overcame, but it took me because I had my day job and all, the babies and all the other thing. And my day job wasn't exactly light. Working at Fidelity, on their deals team or, in their benefits area, both of which I worked at Fidelity at one time or the other, are not light jobs. So, serious day job, studying at night and trying to make this business go. Ultimately, Caesar and I, when we got married, we had the babies, but Caesar ultimately left his day job to support the effort to get the winery up and on its feet. We built a barn behind our home first, and we started small. So we were able to take $5,000 investment and kind of just grow it organically into what is LaBelle Winery now. But I guess the biggest obstacle in the middle of all that was getting financing and getting a bank in our area to believe that we could do this. So when we'd kind of built a small wholesale business, Caesar was supporting the production during the day. Like he doesn't make wine, he doesn't want to make wine, but he can take wine from tank to bottle for me. So he in the early days it was him and whoever could come and help for the day to get wine in the bottle kind of thing. We were really pasting it together as best we could. And then we launched a little wholesale business. So we started going, we can self-distribute in New Hampshire. So we started getting accounts at grocery stores and mom and pop stores and little chains and barbecue shops. And it was starting to kind of take off. And we had about maybe 200 stores opened up for us. Just me and Caesar, by the way, no employees. We had about 200 stores open, and we said to each other, I think it's time to build the real thing, like the big facility. So we started looking for money and backers and financing to do that. And that was a very big hurdle for us because convincing a bank that this was feasible in New Hampshire, where there wasn't another winery of this size, and certainly not another hospitality group of this size. They just were like, great idea, sounds amazing. We can't do that, especially since it was 2010 when I was asking for that loan. And I was asking for $5.3 million, which is a lot of money. And it was 2010, and you may remember there was kind of a, dip
Right.
in, there was a
Mhm.
recession then, and the banks were like, what is happening? So four banks denied me, but the fifth bank said yes. And so I worked really hard to get that business plan convincing enough that we finally got them after 18 months of back and forth to give us the loan. And then we built LaBelle
I,
Amherst, our flagship place.
I think I know the answer to this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you ever miss the practice of law?
Absolutely. You
You
thought I
still
would
miss
say
it.
no.
I thought you were going to say no.
I
So
know.
tell me what you miss about it.
No, I do miss it. Although I get to do a lot of legal stuff, kind of, because I'm a business owner. So, I'm always dealing. I have 250 employees, so I've got HR issues I'm dealing with. I've got to know HR laws. I've got contracts all the time, of course, because we're always, either writing contracts with clients or, analyzing contracts for people that we're hiring. So, I get to do a little bit of stuff, and I do some real estate stuff because. I'm always expanding and buying more properties.
Okay,
So
so yes.
I get to dabble, but I do miss it. And this is what I miss. Like as a business owner, you're an island. You're like it's just me, right? I'm the end of the line. And so what I miss is the camaraderie and the quick witted, like you go in the hallway and you kind of, at the law firm, you could go down to the water bubbler and hash out a problem and say, what do you think of this? I'm working on this, give me your take on that. I miss that. I miss that camaraderie of having super smart partners right at my ready all the time. Because when you're at the top of a business, it's a little bit lonely.
Yeah,
I'll
I can
I'll
imagine.
say
I
that.
can imagine that. So okay. So do you have outside counsel that you use nowadays?
I do. I
Okay, so
absolutely.
here's the question. Then here's the question. What kind of client are you?
I think well, I don't know. I think I'm a good client because you don't have to explain everything to me, but maybe I'm a pain in the butt. I don't know.
So yeah, I was what kind of a client? It's kind of I remember some I loved and some I didn't like, and I used to always say that boy, I wouldn't want to be that person's lawyer or whatever it was. And so anyway,
Right.
it's an
Right. Maybe I
interesting.
know a little too much to, like I'm
Yeah,
troublesome. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. I remember I used to sometimes say to some of my clients who were just business people and about MBAs or whatever they had, and they would say they would have some sort of opinion. I would just jokingly say, "Listen, if you want a law degree, I can spend a lot of time with you and get you through that part. But why don't we just agree who has what and move
Let
on?"
me do my job.
Yeah, let me do my job exactly. So I this is so fascinating to me because you made such a major leap, from one thing that is totally opposite another. When you went to the folks, but I would love to have been a fly on the wall when you went to Fidelity and said, "Oh yeah, I'm leaving," and they said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm starting a winery." Take us. I mean, what was their reaction?
So, because of the financial disclosure laws that apply to working as a lawyer at Fidelity, I had disclosed early on that I had started this business kind of on the side. And so I needed to that was all approved and through the channels. So it wasn't a surprise, I don't think, to them, but I think everybody was really confused, like anybody, but the folks at Fidelity in particular, very confused. You're doing what? You're starting a winery? Where? You're not moving to Napa? Wait, in New Hampshire? Do grapes even grow in New Hampshire? How do you know how to make wine? There were like so many questions. And like, how are you going to fund this? Who's going to come buy wine from New Hampshire? This was all, there were so many questions and so many doubters. not just at Fidelity, but even in my own family, my extended family, we're kind of like, are you sure this is a good idea? We watched how hard you worked in law school. I mean, think about how hard you worked to get your law degree and then to get the incredible job that I had, and how hard I was working to build my reputation as a lawyer and how much I loved it. Um, in the eyes of many of my close friends or family, they were kind of like, are you throwing that all away? I guess you got to follow your dreams. That's what it kind of boiled down to. And you do. And that's what I'll say. You know, if you have a dream in your heart, life is way too short to not pursue it. My thought at the time, Doug, was that I could always go back to practicing law if I had to. And I still can.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I say to folks is that line is that, once you've got that license, it's kind of an insurance policy. If something doesn't work out, you can always fall back on it. It's,
Yep.
it's always going to be there. When I moved to North Carolina and stopped really practicing actively law, people found out I was a lawyer. Before I knew it, people are knocking on my door asking me for whatever they asked me for, and which was fine, and I do as favors. But you've always got that to fall back on, which is the nice part about having a law degree.
It
But
is.
okay, so now you've made this quantum leap, and you've borrowed a boatload of money from a
Yeah.
bank,
Yes.
and so it's like you want to take one challenge at a time, but you're all in at that point. Tell us a little bit more about how you started with wine, and then you started to expand into events, into all sorts of other things that you got into. Take us through that entrepreneurial process that you went through to see the bigger picture and ultimately deliver on it.
Yeah, so luckily, I mean, and I think that my advice for any entrepreneur is you really, even if you think you don't like math or that you're not good at it, you have to love math and financial math in particular. And so I knew that I could write a business plan and I knew that I could get comfortable with my numbers. And I'm a very conservative projector. So that's the first thing I'll say is like looking at this project, I really had to know my numbers and I had to feel comfortable that I wasn't sacrificing or jeopardizing my whole family to follow my silly dream. You know what I mean? And then this small growth that we did in the barn behind our house, allowed me to kind of dip my toe in the water, make sure there was an appetite for the wine, make sure that the wine was good, make sure that my business plan was sound before we did that ultimate leap and took the big loan and built the 20,000 square foot facility in Amherst, which is our flagship facility, planted 3 acres of vineyard. We kind of went all in, as you say. And I knew enough to know that the numbers didn't bear out just a winery in New Hampshire because the market wasn't there for it at the time. Certainly, it's a little more now, but people were not going to come and support just a winery. So I really felt that I needed to create my own demand on the property. And so I did that by creating an event center, adjacent to the winery. So there's a gorgeous event space where we host at the Amherst facility, 300 or so events a year. Weddings, birthday parties, anniversaries, you name it. And then, of course, we put on our own events, wine dinners, theme dinners. We're having a gorgeous New Year's Eve party in the Great Gatsby style. So all of these events are always percolating at the winery. It kind of keeps people interested in coming back. There are educational classes. I have a class tonight, actually. I'm teaching cooking with wine. And so, you can come and learn how to use wine as a main ingredient in your cooking pursuits at home. Cook like a winemaker, cook with a winemaker's palate, all these fun things that we do at the winery to bring people in because I knew I needed to create demand for the product. And so the events use the product, and then there, on the other side is a bistro, a French style bistro, and the restaurant is busy and it gets a lot of traction, and people buy a lot of wine there too. And of course, then there's the wholesale business, so we distribute the wine all around the state, and that gives me another avenue to make sure there's enough revenue to support that big mortgage that we have.
So I'm just completely fascinated by this whole thing because you were a lawyer, a finance lawyer essentially, and now you're a restaurateur, a winemaker, an event planner, all these other things that are just you don't learn that in law school, that's for sure. So your learning curve is very, very fast, obviously, in terms of your experience. But so tell us a little bit more about your wines.
Sure. So that's that's kind of a funny topic because I'm kind of an odd winemaker in that well, I'm a woman. We've already established that that's odd. But also, I make more labels than is normal for a winery. So I keep wanting to make new things. And so the trouble is I'll wake up and say, as I did a couple years ago, we really, really need to add Methode Champenoise sparkling to the lineup. So we created three new sparkling wines in the French style. And those are hand turned. They're like gorgeous bottles of wine and sparkling. And I just am in love with them. So as a result, I have about 35 labels, which is a ridiculous amount of wine for a winemaker to produce, but it's what we do. And our reds are very, very good. I'm very proud of the reds because often reds, especially from northern wineries, get a bad rap. But we make big, bold, deep reds and lighter ones too, of course, but it's the big, deep, bold ones that I'm the proudest of because it's a tricky thing to do in New Hampshire. I'm also super proud of the fact that we produce all of our wines in a clean crafted mindset. So I don't add additives, I don't add chemicals. I'm more of a European style winemaker in that regard. So even though FDA allows us to do certain things like, American wineries can glug a big vat of glycerin into their wine tank to give the wine better mouthfeel. I don't want to do that. I'm going to pay attention in the wine cellar. I'm going to do a good job in the wine cellar so I don't have to add glycerin. So our wines are natural. They don't have additives. They're just gorgeous representations of the grape itself. And I even have a couple of fun wines that are made from fruit because that's where I started. I started at a blueberry winery, if you remember the beginning of the
Right,
story.
right.
And so I still make a blueberry wine because it's how I started and it makes me happy and it's delicious. So I make a dry blueberry wine. And actually, fun fact, blueberries age a lot like grapes because they have a lot of tannin. So blueberry wines age beautifully. And so I make that and I make a blueberry port, which is gorgeous because I make vanilla brandy that flavors it in the end. It's really, really beautiful. Anyway, just a couple of fruit wines, primarily grape wines, dry, traditional European style grape wines. And I just love what I do.
Do you grow all of your grapes yourself or do you source them elsewhere?
No, I can't grow enough in New Hampshire. I don't have enough land. New Hampshire land is very, very expensive and farmland is not prevalent in southern New Hampshire. So I do grow three acres in Amherst and 3 acres in Derry, but it doesn't provide enough for me. I bring in 83 to 90 additional ton from other farms. And so I'll bring in some stuff from New York, from the Finger Lakes region, and I bring some from Washington State. Very rarely do I use California grapes. Almost always, I like colder climate grapes. So Washington State, Oregon, if I have to.
And now you have a book that you told me about earlier that you've written to entice more people. So pick it up. It's in the back there. I see it. Wine and weddings.
Sure, wine weddings. I wrote this book to help the poor couples that, we have all these couples, we've done over 1,000 weddings at the winery at this point. And I see these poor couples come in and they're bewildered. Planning a wedding is hard. There's lots to do. There's endless choices. And now there's all this pressure, that it has to be Instagrammable and it has to, be perfect for social media posts later and the photos and this and that. So there's just a lot of pressure and they're very expensive. Weddings are incredibly expensive, as
Tell
you
me about
know,
it.
as you know. So we, yeah, your daughter having, I know, gotten married at a wedding. So, I mean, at a winery. So I wrote a book as a guide to help these poor brides and grooms and figure out, the process. And I had so much fun writing it. And I got to use all the beautiful photos from the weddings that have happened at LaBelle and some of my own wedding photos too, which were fun. So that book is great.
So are you have two sons, right?
I have two sons.
Are they married?
No, they're teenagers.
Are they teenagers now? Okay. Are they getting married at the winery?
I hope so. Someday.
Is that going to be one of the prenuptials that they have to tell their bride to be that I'll
Yes.
marry you, but the venue's taken? That's
Yes.
where we're going to go?
I don't know. My older son works at the winery now, so he may think that's too much like being at work. I don't know. We'll find out.
I also noted in some of the things I read about you that you're very much into giving, paying it forward and the community environment and stuff. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, sure. I can't imagine growing a business for just to have additional piles of money. Like that's not at all our ethos. At LaBelle, the wine is at the core of LaBelle, but we always say charitable is at the heart. And whether that's in our own community, of the staff, the team of 250 people that make LaBelle Winery go, the LaBelle Winery staff, or whether it's in our local community or further within the state of New Hampshire or in Northern Mass. Our area should benefit by the fact that my business has been able to grow here. And that's our philosophy. So to that end, we help over 200 charities a year, whether it's through big ways, hosting their events to raise money at LaBelle, maybe through a fundraiser, a gala dinner, or something like that, or whether it's through, giving them gift baskets for their charitable auctions at their own facilities or whatever. Big ways, small ways, always trying to help our local community. It's a core tenet of LaBelle Winery.
Wow. That's terrific. This is so impressive. I'm blown away by this interview. I really am. This has been really wonderful. So let's conclude with a last question, which would be, if you were talking to a lawyer who's been practicing and at a point in their career where they're thinking about a shift, what would you say to them about how they can reinvent, how they can accept risk and follow their dreams?
Oh gosh, I say, first of all, don't ignore it. Really explore it. If you've got something on your heart, you can't ignore it. You owe yourself. I mean, you've been given this beautiful life, for me, God, whatever deity you believe in, you've been given this opportunity to live, and you shouldn't ignore what your heart is telling you. So you owe it to yourself and to the universe to give it a try, bear it out. Write that business plan. And I run a 6-week seminar on writing business plans in the first quarter, usually January, February, March. And it helps people develop their business plans into their ideas into a real solid plan that they can execute on. So you've got to put in the work. You've got to do the plan. A lot of people will say, I have a dream to do this, this, and this. It doesn't matter until you write that down, until you make a plan. You've only got a pipe dream. You don't have a real plan. So we should acknowledge the things that are on our heart, shape them into a plan that's actionable. And then you got to do the math like I did. And no matter what, you have to be saving your money toward that goal. So especially for young aspiring entrepreneurs, they ask me, what's the advice? What's the piece of advice you can give us, Amy? How do we do what you did? I say, save your money. Because I had enough money saved that I had a cushion. So I could take this little risk, and I knew that I had some retirement money, I had some savings, and I knew that if it all went to pieces, I could keep my house. You know what I mean? I could still buy groceries for the kiddos. So that savings plan when you're young, making sure you're putting away money so that you have a cushion is so important.
Wow.
So I say do it. Follow your dreams.
That's the way to end it. That's the way to end it. So thank you, Amy, for being a guest today. Been inspiring. It really has been. I know the listeners and the viewers are going to really enjoy the show. So
thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I really love to talk about following your dreams.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.